Imagine looking up at the sky over Kansas City, right? And you're watching a standard Boeing 737 streak through the clouds.
hmm
But knowing that sitting inside that pressurized cabin is the original, incredibly fragile parchment that literally birthed the United States.
It's wild to even picture.
It really is. It's a completely counterintuitive scenario. But
Mhm.
right now, we are looking at a mobilization of history so massive, it's completely blowing the doors off the traditional travel industry.
Yeah, I mean, it is a logistical undertaking that almost defies scale. When you look at the sheer volume of movement planned for this year, we're talking about a fundamental reshaping of how Americans interact with their own geography.
And that is exactly what we are plunging into today on this deep dive. I'm your host, and joined as always by our resident travel and history expert to help you figure out your summer plans.
Glad to be here, and we've got a lot to cover today.
We really do, because if you're looking at your calendar right now, you already know that today is April 16th, 2026. That means we are less than 3 months away from the Semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the United States on July 4th.
Which I have to say is a very heavy, almost academic-sounding word.
Semi-quincentennial. Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Right, but it's describing what is actually going to be the most kinetic, localized, and widespread physical celebration in modern history.
So to figure out how to actually navigate this, we've pulled together a massive stack of the ultimate travel guides, historical itineraries, industry analyses, all specifically geared toward this 2026 milestone.
And there is a lot of data in there.
So much. Which is why our mission today is to decode this impending travel surge for you. We're extracting the mechanics of these awe-inspiring events so you can find the experience that actually resonates with you.
Right, without drowning in information overload.
Hmm.
Because the instinct for most people planning a trip around a historical anniversary is to just aim for the obvious geographic targets.
The usual suspects, yeah.
Exactly. But what our sources reveal is that the traditional rules of heritage tourism have been completely rewritten for this specific year.
Okay, well, let's unpack this by starting with those obvious geographic targets, because we really have to understand the strain they are under right now.
Oh, absolutely.
The travel guides universally point to the original 13 colonies as the epicenters, the cradle of the revolution, right? And the undisputed center of gravity for all of this is, of course, Philadelphia.
Naturally. I mean, Philadelphia is attempting to absorb a volume of tourism that its colonial grid was simply never designed to handle.
Yeah, looking at their itineraries, they aren't just doing a weekend celebration.
No, not at all.
They're stretching the capacity of the city with the Wawa Welcome America Festival running continuously from June 19th all the way through July 4th.
That is more than 2 solid weeks of daily programming.
Right. We're talking multiple synchronized fireworks displays, massive national parades, and a centerpiece exhibition at the Museum of the American Revolution called the Declaration's Journey.
Which is going to be incredibly popular.
For sure. Plus, you have the heavy hitters like the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall running at absolute maximum capacity.
And just up the coast, Boston is attempting an even more complex logistical feat, I would say.
Definitely.
In June, they're staging this massive 250th anniversary reenactment of the Battle of Bunker Hill. But the event that is truly commanding the attention of the travel industry happens in July.
The Sail 250 event. Or I think some sources call it Sail Boston 2026.
Yes.
Yeah.
From July 11th through the 16th, Boston is orchestrating a grand parade of sail.
I saw pictures of the plans for this. It looks insane.
It really does. They're navigating a fleet of massive international tall ships, these majestic multi-masted vessels from all over the world, right into the narrow, modern commercial lanes of Boston Harbor.
Which is an active harbor.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to consider the maritime logistics of coordinating 18th and 19th century replica frigates alongside modern harbor traffic. It basically transforms the city's waterfront into a functioning maritime museum.
Then you add in the Boston Pops Fireworks Spectacular. And obviously the travel guides are heavily highlighting Washington, D.C. with the A Capital 4th concerts on the National Mall.
Can't forget D.C.
Nope. And down in Virginia, the historic Triangle So, Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown, they're rolling out entirely new, heavily curated museum exhibits. But, reading through all these epicenters, I do have to push back a little on the reality of the traveler's experience here.
Okay. What's the hesitation?
Well, if I'm a listener staring at my screen, right, trying to book a trip to the East Coast right now, my biggest fear is just the density of it all.
The crowds.
Yeah. The infrastructure of 18th century cities wasn't built for 21st century megatourism. So aren't we essentially suggesting that people spend thousands of dollars to go look at the exact same static brick buildings they could have seen like 5 years ago?
Except now they get to be crushed in a crowd of 1 million people.
Exactly, while waiting in an endless line.
It is, honestly, the single most valid concern you can have when looking at these itineraries. But what's fascinating here is how the sources differentiate 2026 from any other year.
How so?
Well, the draw isn't the static brick buildings. The appeal is centered on deeply curated, ephemeral experiences.
Meaning things that only exist in this specific, fleeting window of time.
Precisely. You aren't traveling to Boston to look at the water. You're traveling to witness the staggering visual of dozens of towering canvas sails blotting out the modern skyline.
Which is a visual that just dissolves after July 16th.
Right. And you aren't just walking into the Museum of the American Revolution. You're entering the Declarations journey, which is this exhibit constructed through years of archival loan agreements.
Ah, so it's temporary.
Completely. It will be dismantled and scattered back to private vaults when the year ends.
So it's not about the permanent geography at all. It's about stepping into a constructed temporal pocket. You're buying a ticket to a moment, not a monument.
That is the exact psychology driving the East Coast surge. It's the shared national experience of a temporal spectacle.
But still, those physical limitations in Boston and Philly, they create a massive logistical problem.
Huge.
You simply cannot fit 330 million Americans into 3 colonial cities without the infrastructure collapsing. Which explains the most surprising and honestly the most ambitious finding in our stack of sources.
The decentralization.
Yes, if the people can't get to the history has to become incredibly mobile.
And this is where we see a profound evolution in how we handle national memory. We are looking at a highly decentralized, mobilized celebration.
The centerpiece of this is the Freedom Plane National Tour, which we hinted at earlier.
Right.
The National Archives has specially branded a Boeing 737, and they're flying it to major hubs across the country, places like Kansas City, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Miami.
It's honestly incredible.
They're carrying original founding documents and basically opening up the tarmac for the public to view them for absolutely free.
Yeah.
But wait, putting centuries-old fragile pieces of parchment on a commercial runway? That sounds like a preservation nightmare. How does the National Archives actually pull that off mechanically?
It requires essentially turning the interior of a 737 into a flying clean room and a bank vault combined.
Wow.
Yeah, because when you're dealing with paper that is 250 years old, the primary enemies are fluctuations in relative humidity, barometric pressure, and ultraviolet light.
That makes sense.
But even the microscopic vibrations of the aircraft engines during turbulence can actually degrade the ink.
Wait, just the vibrations from flying?
Yep. So they can't just put it in a nice glass box and buckle it into a window seat.
Right, obviously not.
Far from it. The logistics dictate custom-engineered encasements with built-in microclimates. These cases maintain a perfectly stable humidity level, usually buffered by specialized gels.
Oh, okay.
And they are filled with inert argon gas to prevent any oxidation of the materials.
That is so sci-fi.
Then you have to design shock-absorbing mounts that isolate the artifact from the kinetic energy of the plane landing. And that's all before you even get to the tactical security required to park a national treasure at a commercial airport in Atlanta.
It's an absolute logistical marvel, and it's not just the airspace either. The sources also detail these Freedom 250 trucks.
Yes, the ground fleet.
Right, they're mobile museums acting as a ground fleet, traveling to 1,000 different locations nationwide throughout 2026. And this all ties into the broader US 250 Freedom Tour, which is an initiative with the explicit mandate to ensure all 50 states are physically visited.
And if we connect this to the broader picture, the Freedom Plane and the truck fleets, they represent a massive democratization of access.
How do you mean?
Historically, engaging with the physical touchstones of the American founding was inherently exclusionary. The burden of access was entirely on the citizen. You had to have the disposable income, the time off work, and the physical mobility to travel to Washington, D.C.
Oh, I see. So if I'm a listener in Missouri or Florida, you're telling me I don't have to endure the friction of an East Coast pilgrimage. The foundational history is essentially being delivered to my regional airport like Amazon Prime.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. By mobilizing the artifacts, the organizers are collapsing the distance between the citizen and the founding.
That's amazing.
It allows someone in Kansas City to have a visceral physical proximity to the documents in their own backyard. It effectively removes the financial and geographic barriers that normally gatekeep historical tourism.
Which fundamentally changes the map for 2026.
It really does.
But, as we expand our view out toward the Midwest and the West Coast, the conversation in these travel guides shifts gears entirely. It moves away from the colonies and starts focusing on the American landscape itself, the actual physical expansion of the country.
Because the country is much larger than its origin story.
Exactly.
And this geographic shift highlights a serendipitous and highly complex overlap with another major American milestone happening this exact same year.
Right. Let's lay out the landscape first. Out in South Dakota, the national park infrastructure is being activated with Mount Rushmore planning a highly rare, logistically intense fireworks display on July 3rd.
That's going to be huge.
And the very next day, July 4th, the brand new Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library is slated to host its grand opening in North Dakota. So the Great Plains are heavily involved. But that overlap you mentioned, 2026 is also the 100th anniversary of Route 66.
The Route 66 Centennial.
The ultimate icon of the American automobile era, right?
Yeah.
According to the guides, major road trip celebrations and massive infrastructure art projects are happening all along that corridor, specifically activating cities like Springfield, Missouri, and Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yeah, there's a lot of programming out there.
But I have to admit, I struggle to see how these two things belong in the same itinerary.
Why is that?
Well, because aesthetically and philosophically, they feel like totally different universes. I mean, I see 1776 and I think foundational philosophy, quill pens, and localized thought. But I see Route 66 and I think neon signs, diners, V8 engines, and kinetic motion. Why is the travel industry treating these as a cohesive travel package for 2026?
It seems contradictory until you look at the mechanics of nation building. What this dual anniversary offers the traveler is a profound opportunity to experience cause and effect in real time.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
If 1776 represents the architect's blueprint, the theoretical borders and ideals of the nation, then Route 66 represents the pouring of the concrete.
Ah, the idea versus the execution.
Exactly. The revolution created the abstract concept of the United States, but it was the roads, the automobile infrastructure, and the aggressive movement west that physically stitched those abstract borders together.
That makes total sense when you put it like that.
Right. The guides are pairing them because celebrating 1776 without acknowledging the westward expansion is like celebrating the birth of a child, but ignoring the person they grew up to become. Route 66 is the kinetic energy of the American century.
That completely reorients how you plan a trip. I mean, you can stand in Philadelphia to understand the genesis of the nation and then fly out west, rent a car, and physically drive through the modernization of the nation.
It's chapter 1 and chapter 2.
And the travel industry is clearly anticipating that people want to experience this scale because the alternative transport options detailed in the sources are just staggering.
The infrastructure required to move this many people across non-traditional routes is immense.
Yeah, the sources outline over 50 distinct waterway itineraries purely dedicated to the semi-quincentennial. We're talking about massive riverboats navigating inland waterways with deeply immersive, patriotic programming right on board.
Which is a great alternative to driving.
Totally. And for land travel, the major tour operators have engineered entirely curated cross-country motor coach trips spanning 7 to 14 days. These are designed to thread millions of tourists through these historical hubs without creating massive bottlenecks.
It is a masterclass in routing and capacity management. They are essentially spreading the sheer weight of the tourism across the continent to prevent the East Coast from buckling.
Okay, so we've explored the grand mechanics. We've talked about the physics of a flying clean room over Kansas City, the maritime puzzle of tall ships in Boston, and the philosophy of tracing the nation's concrete arteries along Route 66.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But now we need to translate all of this into a practical toolkit. How does a listener actually execute on this without getting crushed by the logistics?
Well, the first step is acknowledging the reality of the timeline. Enthusiasm is great, but without aggressive preparation, it turns into frustration very quickly.
And every single source we reviewed leads with a stark, undeniable warning regarding the booking window.
Yes. Do not wait.
If you want to be anywhere near a historical epicenter, whether that's Independence Hall, Boston Harbor, or a balcony overlooking the Mount Rushmore fireworks, the time to finalize your accommodations is right now.
Because today's mid-April.
Exactly. That gives you roughly 10 weeks. The logistical strain on hotels, flights, and ticketed events is going to create a severe bottleneck the closer we get to July.
The scarcity of localized resources like hotel rooms in a specific colonial district just cannot be overstated. Once capacity is reached, no amount of planning can bypass the physics of a sold-out city.
So true. But assuming the listener heeds that warning and locks in their travel, the guides pivot to something I found deeply fascinating from a psychological perspective.
The souvenirs.
Yeah. The sources feature a heavy emphasis on commemorative gear designed specifically to track this 2026 journey.
The proliferation of physical souvenirs for this event is quite revealing, actually.
They highlight items like customizable wooden travel maps where you can physically place a pin in the states you visit, or large format paper calendars featuring vintage style travel posters of the national parks and Route 66. And what strikes me here is the sheer tangibility of it all. In an era where every flight we take, every photo we snap, every GPS coordinate we cross is seamlessly tracked in the cloud on our phones, why are these travel guides pushing heavy wooden maps and paper calendars?
It comes down to how the human brain processes the abstract weight of history. 250 years is an incredibly abstract concept.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It is difficult to conceptualize that scale of time.
So we try to anchor the abstract time to physical space.
Yes. Digital memories, like photos on a phone, they're ethereal. They lack physical permanence. When you are participating in a milestone of this magnitude, there is a deep psychological drive to possess physical proof of your presence within that history.
That is so interesting.
Engaging with a tactile object like driving a pin into a wooden map after stepping off a tarmac in Miami to see the Declaration of Independence, it grounds the fleeting experience. It turns a temporal event into a permanent physical artifact in your own home.
Wow, so you're basically creating your own archive. You are engaging with a physical wooden map for the exact same psychological reason you are flocking to see the physical parchment of the founding documents. It makes the history real.
It is the ultimate validation of the traveler's journey.
It really is. So as we pull all these massive logistical threads together, the sheer breadth of how you can intersect with this anniversary is just astonishing.
Truly unprecedented.
Whether your idea of the perfect semi-quincentennial is feeling the base of a fireworks show over a South Dakota monument, or staring up at the canvas sails of an 18th century frigate in Boston Harbor.
Or driving.
Right, tracing the neon glow of the American automobile era down Route 66, or simply driving to your local regional airport to walk onto a Boeing 737 and stand inches away from the ink that started it all. The mechanisms to connect with this moment have never been more accessible.
It is a remarkable mobilization of resources engineered specifically so that history is no longer something you just read about. It is something you actively intercept.
Well said. Thank you for helping map out the sprawling mechanics of this travel year with me.
It's been a fascinating landscape to analyze. But, before we wrap up, looking at all the preservation techniques and physical souvenirs raises a deeply compelling thought experiment. Something I think is worth leaving you with to ponder.
Oh, an intellectual curveball. Let's hear it.
Well, the billions of dollars and massive infrastructure driving this 2026 celebration are, by definition, entirely focused on preserving and revering the past. We are engineering microclimates to protect centuries-old parchment, and we're buying vintage maps to connect with previous generations.
Right.
But imagine the country's 300th anniversary in 2076, or its massive quincentennial in 2276. What physical objects, what cultural touchstones, or what specific technological artifacts from our current era, the 2020s, do you think future Americans will load onto their version of a freedom plane to define the history we are living through right now?
Wow, that completely flips the axis of the entire conversation. What is the mundane object sitting on our desks right now that becomes the priceless, climate-controlled treasure of tomorrow?
Makes you think.
It's a brilliant question. So as you finalize your bookings, as you figure out where you fit into this massive, uncontainable, nationwide movement that is 2026, take a hard look at the world around you. The history they will be scrambling to celebrate in the future is happening right in front of you today. Have a fantastic trip, and thanks for taking the deep dive with us.